the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for coming tonight. Are there any visitors? I don't think there are any visitors in our audience.
Other than always welcome and nice to have staff.
Yes, it is. Okay, consent agenda. We have a motion to accept.
You skipped public comment.
Sorry. Is there any public comment? Any public comment tonight? Okay. Now we're down to the consent agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to accept the consent agenda? Sure.
I'd like to move that the Board of Education approves consent agenda consisting of the minutes of the September 28, 2017 regular meeting, monthly expenditure report for September 2017, and food service monthly financial report for 2017. September 2017.
And second. Is there a second? Ann? Okay. Any discussion or questions? So I just have a quick question about the food service. Are we doing better?
Operationally, yes. So we did have a retirement. We've chosen not to replace that individual. We've moved an individual from Park Lane over to, I believe it was Oswegatchie. So we've reduced heads by one. I would say that we're actually seeing a slight downturn, a lower volume of sales in the first month. So I met yesterday with what's now going to be a monthly meeting with the union heads, and they're coming up with ideas for a more creative menu. They feel it's a little bit stagnant. So we're working it, but I'm relatively confident this year that it'll be positive.
Okay, so let's go to the negative.
It always starts off negative.
You might recall you slightly raised lunch prices last spring.
That's what I was wondering if that would have an impact.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anybody opposed? The motion carried unanimously. Okay, reading, is there any correspondence?
None for me to report.
I don't have any either. Superintendent's report.
Sure. Obviously, the bulk of the report tonight will be the annual State Summative Assessments report. You might recall that each spring, and in recent years, that assessment has been the SBAC assessment in grades 3 through 8, SAT at the high school, and there's still some small pockets of CMT and CAP science left out there, and I'm sure Craig will cover kind of what the coming years in science will mean. We do touch upon SAT tonight, but know that Jason Adler will be here in November to do a much more in-depth review of SAT, ACT, and kind of the college overview. You've all been here at least a year, so you know the routine on that. Obviously, you received your board packets. You'll see some distinct shifts in the way data is being presented by the state, thus affecting our presentation to you. It's really a big emphasis on growth model, getting kids to move from point A to point B, no matter where they are. If they are at the lower levels, getting them obviously up, but even our kids who are already at standard and have met standard in this model, we want kids to improve and if they're at the very top, at the very least, maintain. So you'll see some distinct shifts in the way that is presented this year. We have a PowerPoint synthesis of the full report, which Craig is going to dive into now.
Thank you. So, as Tom said, comprehensive report issued to you, tried to summarize it, and as Tom also mentioned about the shifts, I just want to start with kind of what are the measurement systems. So when we look at how the SBAC is kind of using the measurement of growth and achievement, we really need to start off by what are those definitions. So achievement, or like the CMT would call it, that proficiency goal band, is a one-time snapshot measurement of students' academic performance. And so that's kind of the box scores of where the kids are relative to the four bands of achievement: which would be not met, approaching, met, which is the state of Connecticut's goal for all students, and exceed. So somewhere in the met and exceed band is Connecticut's goal for all students. In addition to that static snapshot, there's a growth component. And so you will see later in the slides more information about the vertical scale scores, but the test is criterion referenced, meaning it's measured against a vertical scale for grades 3 through 8. Further, the state sets, no matter where you are in whatever those 4 achievement bands are, a target which is ambitious yet achievable for all students. And you'll see that growth is kind of broken down into, did you meet your goal? And which is yes or no. And then the other way is, what percent of the goal was met? So in the past, when we looked at CMTs, the goal was to try to get kids to that proficient band to goal, and we spent a lot of time on the almost there bunch to try to get them into that proficient and goal band. This system really takes into account all students, regardless of their disability or their socioeconomic starting point, and expects all students to grow. And let me explain this a little further. So this picture, which I can't from this far read the numbers, so I'm not expecting you to read the numbers, but this picture shows across the top, you've got the different grades going down, grades 3 through 8, and then you have the 4 big buckets: level 1 not met, level 2 approaching, level 3 met, level 4 exceeding. Each level is broken into 2, the low band and the high band. And you'll see vertical scale scores that students would achieve, which is really the summation of all their test components. Kind of like how the SAT has 800 for language arts and 800 for math for a total of 1,600. They have a similar but different vertical scale score going from 2,000 to almost 3,000. So if we take a student, and the model was designed, if a student starts in grade 3 and scores low, in the low end of level 1, then you'll see circled underneath that is a growth target. So the state is saying that with effective instruction, a student should grow, in this case by 82 points, and if they meet their growth target, in grade 4, they should have a score within the higher band of not met. So we're not asking a student to go from not met to goal in 1 year. That would be unobtainable and unrealistic. But we are asking the student to move to like the next band up within that one level. If we play this out, the thought would be that each year, if they meet their growth target, they would be within that level 3 band, somewhere in that lower band or higher band. And so that's how this vertical alignment was done. So you can see each year the expectations go up, which is why there's a certain growth target. Now, the assessment system was not just designed to close the achievement gap, which the state is saying should be closed within 3 years. But also, if we look at a similar, this is ELA, there's a table for math next, similar setup, different numbers for the vertical scale, different numbers for the growth scale. It's also expecting your most precocious learners, who may start out high, they actually have to continue to learn at that high level in order to maintain that high level academic status. And so you can see in this model, if a student is scoring at the 2557, didn't bring my cheaters, they need to maintain a certain level in order to continue at that high level the next year. So I just wanted to kind of demonstrate how the criterion referenced test is kind of the backbone of it, which is this vertical scale. Marcia.
Quick question. I can't see the numbers either. But going back to the ELA one,
Yes.
is the growth number the same all the way through?
It is not. So
You said it was what,
82 the first, if you're in the low level, and then it goes to 69, 55, 41, 40. The growth target is to say that as the students achieve higher scores, certainly to grow and improve gets harder and harder. We know that going from the classic F to a D, you might be able to hop with a certain movement to get to an A to an A+. It's a lot harder to move.
Right.
And so the higher end of the scale, the lesser growth needed.
I just couldn't see it, so I wasn't.
Fair enough. On your full report, in Appendix A, which is page 24, you may be able to see something that is a little more readable.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And if you want it blown up even bigger, we can do that.
That's what those numbers are.
That's the numbers up here. In Appendix B, the next page is the math numbers.
Okay.
I think one of the flaws in the, I'll call it the old system, where the state was primarily concerned with just achievement, is we focused on those kids who were right on the cusp of goal.
Right.
We ignored, I don't want to say we, some schools ignored the kids at the very bottom because they said, geez, that's not going to help us, even if they improve a lot, because they're probably not getting the goal. And the kids at the top were probably ignored because, oh, they're already there. I don't want to say we don't care if they don't learn, but what was the incentive to keep, on top of them? So I think by the state moving to, I'll admit, this is tough to comprehend. It is a newer system, but the goal and the incentive is for every kid to show growth each year.
Right.
So that's, as I said earlier in our definition, that's the achievement level. I'm now going to talk about the growth measure, which is really in two components. So here's a hypothetical example. The blue, we're going to say 4 students have the same target. And we're going to say that target is to move ahead 60 points. In this visual, it looks like 2 students, the middle 2, have met that target or exceeded that target. So in the calculation, if we only had a class of 4, 2 students met, which means 2 students didn't. The growth rate would be 50%. Because, again, it's a binary measure. Did you make the goal or not? You might have missed it by a point, but you didn't make it. So that's one measure of growth. The second measure of growth, now we look at how close they came to reaching that target. So, if we look at 60 is the goal, the first student obtained 42, little simple division, that's 70% of the target met. If we look at the next student, the goal was 60, and they got 60. That would be 100% of the target met. The test is designed to only go up to 110% of the target, which allows for that exceeding measure, and it doesn't allow you to go below 0 if you regressed. So the third student, goal was 60, target achieved was 66, that's actually 110% of the target. The fourth student, the goal was 60, they obtained 36% of that, 36 points of the 60, which is 60% of the target. So, if you add up 70% plus 100% plus 110% plus 60%, you divide by the number of students, 4, you would get 85%. So if we look at this now, I added some graph information to it, and you'll see up top the growth rate would be 50%. 2 students out of the 4 met their target. The average percent of the growth achieved is really adding up how much every student achieved towards their target and dividing by the number of students, and so you get 85. So this next slide really just in writing explains what I just said. So the growth rate is the percentage of students either meeting or exceeding their growth target.
That's a yes or
yes or no, you met it or you didn't. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
The percent of target achieved is then counting all the achievement for which they might not have met that lofty yet achievable goal of the state-assigned growth target, but they achieved some percent of it. And so now you can kind of see later when we give the 2 graphs about growth rate and percent of target achieved, how that's calculated within the test. I wanted to take that opportunity to kind of give a baseline of the understanding of how the assessment is being used so that the data that follows the report makes sense.
Appreciate it.
So any questions on at least how it's constructed, and then we'll go on to the Waterford relevant data.
Any questions? I don't know why that should make things so difficult.
Well,
It is a complex system.
It was great.
Yes, it
thank
was.
you.
It was. I said that too. I think it's great.
Okay.
So when it's reported out to parents as well as teachers, they get the growth and the level achieved.
They do.
They get a sheet that has both on it.
They do.
Okay.
So right now, again, high-level information, and we know the details are the most important. So I'm going to be presenting now kind of how the district is doing in aggregate, how each grade level is doing. Just know that the principals have the detailed information student by student because that really drives instruction. This next chart really shows the aggregate of grades 3 through 8. Because it's a criterion reference group, you can actually make these aggregate claims actually better than CMTs because technically CMTs were created in isolation. The 3rd grade CMT was a 3rd grade CMT and wasn't necessarily criterion reference to the 4th, which is why some years the CMT seemed harder. So this is all criterion reference, which means you can add up then and say, this is how we're doing grades 3 through 8 total. And what that shows is the red bar would be the not met, the yellow is the approaching, the green is the net, which is, again, where we want to be at the state level, and the blue is the exceeded, which is also where we like to be too. So you can see in the bottom, I kind of add the net and exceed. So as a district right now, we have students, about 65% of the students really where we want them to be with respect to language arts, and we're saying that collectively grades 3 through 8. I'll be drilling down a little bit later, but I just wanted to give you kind of a district barometer. You may see in the report, that there was a slight dip when we compare last year's students to this year. Going from, and in your report, kind of some of the notable takeaways, that going from 65.7% to 64.9 is really 2 students. Statistically, it's 1.5, so it's 2 student difference. So it's negligible because you're measuring technically different groups of kids. Waterford is above the state and the DERG average in ELA. So that's also, I think,
At
important.
all grade levels? I didn't think it was at
As
all
the
grade
aggregate.
As an aggregate.
So, I'll be drilling down and giving you other views too, but just for this particular slide. So now, let's drill down a little bit more. So with ELA, so now you see the bottom bar is, thank you, the bottom bar is the growth rate. And so now we're looking at 3 through 8 together in English language arts. 34.8% of the students met their target, which is lofty, rigorous, yet achievable. So there's some room there for improvement, for sure.
That doesn't mean the other 65% of kids didn't make progress. It just means they didn't hit the state set target. So exactly.
And they could have missed it by 1, but that's one measure.
This is the yes or no question. Did they hit the state set growth target? So one might look at this and say the other 65% of the kids didn't learn. That's not accurate. It just means they didn't hit the state set target. And I remember going through Quaker Hill's reports in my monthly meeting with Chris and saying, this kid missed it by like 2 points, this kid missed it by 1, this kid missed it by 3, like, it's that close, but it's a yes or no metric.
And that's why there's 2 kind of measurements when we talk about growth. So then the top bar, the green bar, again, if you remember back, it's to say, if there's 100 kids, then you would say, what percent of the target did they reach? Either less than 100% or up to 110, add them up, divide by those students, many students, and we have 54% of the students, achieve a percent of the target achieved. So that's saying that collectively, students were getting more than halfway of their target. Ideally, we would want the percent of target achieved to be as close to 100%. Of course, if it was at 100%, then the bottom bar would also be at 100%. So, just to kind of explain the 2 metrics. Yeah, Amanda.
From what correct me if I'm wrong, when I look at my own children's scores from last year, they indicate also that if my child were to take it in the future, this is where they speculate they would land?
That's correct.
Is that another marker also?
Yes, and that marker is right on this chart. So if a child, and since you have actually child data, you could see what the scale score is for ELA. And then you would see, okay, well, they took it in, say, grade 3, that was their target, now they're here, and right below it is their new target. And every principal kind of has now every student's new target, and that's kind of where we're trying to get them. Moving on to math. So again, this is a high-level graph, aggregate data of how we're doing district-wide grades 3 through 8 in math. And as you can see, the met or exceeded combined, i.e. the green and the blue bars, equal 3.27. Thank you. Percent net. Since I mentioned that while a slight decline in ELA in math, and again, it's year over year, we did go up some points which would represent like 15 students kind of moved into that either green or blue band. Some notable takeaways: the percent of students meeting or exceeding the expected achievement level has gone up in math, and the growth that has the growth target and the exceeded are both above the DIRG in the state. So for math, again, we might not at each grade level be exactly where we want to be, but as an aggregate, we're doing okay, and we're moving in the right direction. And the moving in the right direction, let me show you the next slide. So for math, the bottom, or the blue, the growth rate of 37% is actually higher than ELA's growth rate as an aggregate. And the green, the percentage of target achieved, 58%, is actually higher than the ELA's percent of target achieved, which was 54%. So while we continue to have a math focus in this district, because we're not there yet, the percent of growth in math actually exceeded the percent of growth in language arts in the aggregate, and we'll get to grade level breakdowns later, showing that at least we're doing something right because we're moving in the right direction. I mean, in this barometer, you would say, is it stagnant? There's no movement. Are we moving backwards? Both of those metrics would not be good. This at least says we're moving forward.
Because math is starting from a lower base point than, say, ELA, because about 66% of our kids are at or exceeding, in order for math to grow, it needs to grow at a faster rate than ELA. It just makes sense. It's we want that to grow at a faster rate because we're starting from a lower base. So
and one grade could offset. One grade that achieve highly will offset other.
Absolutely.
That is correct, because we're talking the aggregate. I designed this report kind of from a top down, and we'll get to the grade levels next, Marcia. But you're correct. So this is the third year that we have taken the SBAC test, and 3 data points now establishes a trend line. One is just a data point, 2 is interesting, and 3 is kind of a trend. So what you see here, as we take the 2014-15 third graders, last year they were 5th graders. This year they're 6th graders. The growth, while you don't see the exact amount of growth in a percentage point, you have to recognize that the test gets harder, and the difference between those 2% is about 7 students. So in this case, about 7 students were in that green and blue band, maybe in 3rd grade, and by 5th grade are not in that green and blue band. So we have about 200 kids at a grade level. So I just want to kind of quantify the percents, because sometimes percentages can get, what does this mean? Similarly, if you take a 4th grader in 2014-15 and follow it down, we did see some improvement. Statistically, it's also a plus 7 students. So in this grade level, this matched cohort, which is to say exact same kids who took it in 14-15, who then took it in 16-17, 2 years later, this cohort of students, 7 students that weren't in that met or exceeded band are now in it. If we go up a level, 6th grade, 2014-15, who are now our 5th grade, thank you. 5th grade, 2014-15, who are now in 7th grade, we went up by, 7 points. That represents about 14 students. moving into the state band levels we want. Lastly, grade 6, 2014 and 15, now to grade 8. You see, albeit a slight drop, it really equates to 1 student. And again, every year the test gets harder, so it's not that students have regressed, it's just that they didn't grow at the expected growth rate to stay in those performance bands. I didn't, for sake of argument, do the 2-year data points, but it is noteworthy to know that, last year's 3rd graders to this year's 4th graders, we're drilling down to really try to identify what's going on, and that's something that Tom and I will be following up with the elementary principals to really try to see what's going on there, just to kind of show you the other side of the coin.
Yeah, that would trouble me.
It troubles us too.
It's also that particular 3rd grade year in 15-16, if you look at trend data over time, it's in both math and ELA, is off trend. It's significantly higher than other 3rd grade years. Obviously different kids. It still doesn't explain why they didn't achieve at a similar... Yeah, who knows? I mean, who knows, but...
So we'll look at things like, are there curricular issues? Are there instructional issues? Last year was the first year that we put in math assessment as a universal screen, so that was 3 additional times students had to take a computerized test, in addition to what we've asked principals to do, which was to give the interim assessment blocks, which are computerized tests. So one, I wonder, was there computer test fatigue? So we're looking at a lot of things. I don't have any definitive conclusions to report at this point in time.
I mean, expecting that young of an age group to sit at a computer for that long, it reads like War and Peace. If we sat down and said, I don't even know if I would have enough stamina.
That's a tough test too. I agree.
So that's a young age to expect jitterbug kids to sit in a seat and faithfully execute what they really want. At some point they just throw up their just throw up their hands. I can't do it anymore. And I'm like,
no.
I can see where there's a...
So you can see, we just need to look at that. I won't go through everything with math as much, but math actually, there's a lot of good takeaways. So if you can just follow the 3rd to 5th grade kind of flow,
again, we need to drill down.
We have a lot of I wonders on that one. So again, is it the initiative fatigue? Are there curricular or there instructional issues? Really need elementary principals to drill down to try to look at that and square it up. So we know that's something of concern.
I caution that to make an assumption that 15% less kids didn't learn. It just, again, it means they didn't hit the target to be classified as met. So they still could have showed growth, but not at the rate that has been set to stay within the met band.
And what is the margin of error?
Yeah, so each grade level has a margin of error between 4 and 12 vertical scale score points. And if the board would like to get a breakdown of every one, I can have that, but it's not a simple, here's the number. It's really each grade level, and ELA and math also have a slight variation difference because the vertical scale scores for ELA and math are slightly different.
So the margin of error is different for every grade level?
With every grade span, because, again, there's different growth targets. So if everyone had the same growth target, you would then be able to quickly infer that the same margin of error. But because there's different growth targets, yes, every grade level has a different margin of error.
Craig, do you know what the point was to having them have to take the test on the computer?
Ideally, it was for efficiency in scoring so that we would get the score reports back quicker.
One benefit to being on the computer is it is computer adapted. So if you and I were taking the test, you get the first 5 right, your question 6 is going to be different than mine, where I got 2 out of those 6 right. So it's computer
But like Amanda
adaptive.
just said, I mean, for the younger children, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, it's not student friendly.
Although some of these kids are more used to being on computers than we are.
Well, that's true.
It can be engaging.
Yep.
I have a question. So, going back to what Tom said about the growth. So are these charts the actual who made bucket 3 and 4?
Yes,
So these are achievement scores, not the growth.
that is
data.
correct.
Okay.
So that's why the title is Achievement Performance,
Right, okay.
Level 3 and 4 combined, and it's a matched cohort, so it's the same kids over 3 years, which is important, because that's, I think, the best way to measure, as opposed to grade level over grade level when it's different kids.
Right.
I do want to take a little bit of license to show some nice growth. So if we look at grades 4 to 6, you can see a big incline in the percent. That amounts to about 16 students that have moved into the bands we want. From grades 5 to 7, you can see some nice growth. That amounts to about 33 students moving into the bands we want. And when we look at grades 6 through 8, again, some nice growth. That amounts to about 18 students that have moved into the level 3 or level 4 performance bands that weren't in it before. Okay? Now,
Out of 200.
out of about 200, every...
Yeah.
Now, this is the same chart with the vertical scale scores. What the chart doesn't have is the growth targets. And what I am trying to show here is that, again, achievement is, if you will, the box score. So now, how did each grade level at each school do? And the picture kind of shows that, well, if we want to be within the level 3 to level 4 band, we're there. And I sorted the scores from high to low, so you see, like, grade 3, level 3 low, Oswegatchie, slightly higher than Quaker Hill, slightly higher than the state of Connecticut. And Great Neck is in that high level 3. It is of interesting note that Great Neck missed the level 4 by 1 point, but again, that's the box score, kind of where they are. And you can kind of see that, some schools are even in a slightly higher level of achievement band than the state of Connecticut. So that's what this slide is trying to show. Math, a slightly different look. We can see that in all areas we're above the state, and in many grade levels we're at that level 3 band. You'll note in grade 4, all schools are at that level 3 band, albeit low, compared to the state, which is in a approaching band. And you will see that, grade 5, Oswegatchie is close to moving to the next band, but not quite there yet. And, grade 6 and grade 8 are still in that approaching band, not there yet. But again, we are showing that we're making good growth in math. Are we happy with where we are? No, but we shouldn't be if we're in a model of continuous improvement. I did leave out that I do think for ELA that some of our work around Readers and Writers Workshop and continuous job-embedded professional learning with the instructional coaches, I feel would be somewhat attributable to the ELA scores because, we've done that now 3 to 5 years, depending on ELA or math, Readers or Writers Workshop, and it takes usually 3 to 5 years to really show, that an initiative is really working. And I think we're earlier in our math advancements, and we're moving hard in it, and we would expect to see that return on investment in the future. This table is, this chart is really to show you that while there was much discourse last year at the board level around the claims subset scores and their utility, having the at or near.
This is where we wrote the letter.
Yeah, that the MAP scores, which we administer 3 times a year, has a high validity towards SBAC, a predictability, and this is kind of the concordance tables between the 2 assessment tools. And the point of putting this up here is that while we may say that the claim information on the SBAC scores aren't really giving us the information we'd like to know, that we can drill down with the MAP data, and we can drill down with the MAP data 3 times with that formative assessment to kind of show growth, to monitor and adjust instruction, which is of course the best practice, and not get so frustrated with the lack of clarity in the SBAC claims. So that's really the point of showing this.
And I think in the old days, back when I was a teacher with CMTs, you got the CMTs in the spring and you said, geez, what am I going to do differently next year? Whereas having an assessment like MAP, you're doing that on the fly during the school year. And I think that's very powerful for data to have in teachers' hands. To be able to say, this is where this child is, I need to adjust midstream versus waiting a year to say, I wonder how my kid's going to do.
So that is going to kind of wrap up the chapter we're going to call SBAC, unless there are other questions. I tried to kind of take and glean from the report without making this a doctoral thesis and an all-nighter for all of us. Ma'am?
I love this report. I agree with Ann. I think it was superb in its detail. So the principals and obviously the teachers, when did they get this data to start the school year?
So the data the principals got as far as sending the information out to students. The state unrolled an EdSite Secure site really in early October, which really then allows us to kind of download a very easy Excel spreadsheet to have all this data. So this is what we call like the learning year on the assessment, and I'm hoping that the principals will then show how to use the vertical alignment with their faculty after this meeting, and as we meet, Tom and I, with elementary principals and then secondary principals in a short amount of time, we're going to be really unpacking how to use the information from the EdSite Secure to drive instruction and ask questions like, we spend a lot of resources in special ed. How is our special ed population? Are they moving?
That's what I want to know.
We spend a lot of information on, spend a lot of human capital on interventions. We spent a lot of professional development retooling our SRBI process. So are the math interventions or the literacy interventions paying off, meaning are those students then moving up to that next span? Are they reaching their growth target? And I'm going to say, until the EdSite Secure data was put out, it was arduous to try to get that information. So I can't say that, you know, everyone's well versed in it now, but they will be in short order.
So on your page 12 of your big report,
yes,
where it had the blue below standard, and like there were 17 students in grade 8 in reading, the teachers will know who those 17 are, even though they're at the
high school now.
They absolutely will have access to that because...
And you'll trace back on whether they're special ed and if they've had...
Yeah, and actually the database actually codes if they're special ed. The only column we'd have to put in are the stat kids, the students on SRBI, because that's not a reported field. So the answer is yes. That's some of the work we're going to do at the grade-specific principal meetings.
Good. Because I would like, I don't know about my colleagues up here, but I would like a board presentation that includes, because we've been tracking the math issue for a while, to see, to actually use this data and identify if our interventions and programming and our after-school math, Khan Academy, all of those things are working. And if not, what are we going to do to make a difference this year?
So I think integral to that, Mim, is to tie it back to our first meeting at 5 around district goals and strategic plan, is I don't want to say nearly impossible, but it's almost impossible without a coordinated database, because that would all have to be done manually.
Oh, okay.
And not to say it doesn't happen, because I've seen teachers with my own eyes with a stack of individual student reports saying, how did this kid, I know Mr. Discordia does that with the summer school kids, to look at, did we see progress? But I think one of the powerful things about moving towards a data warehouse product is this all gets assembled and is spitting this out for teachers the minute we get that data.
So this isn't like the CMT report site where you could pull up the names of the kids that are in grade 7 below standard?
It is.
The analytics is like that. However, and the analytics, the EdSite Secure has a built-in analytics feature so that the trend line data was actually generated through that site. Right now, because the state just rolled it out in late September and then had follow-up workshops in early October, they are only issuing 2 accounts per district because they're testing the capacity of everyone hitting search at this particular time. The goal would be that all administrators would have individual access. So right now, we will be meeting with, say, the elementary principals, showing the EdSite Secure site, and then posing questions, and then generating it kind of like that to generate those lists, because it's a state capacity issue at this time.
The EdSite Secure site will give us data in a very easy way for identified subgroups like special ed or socioeconomic, but for the, let's say we want to see how all the kids who went through summer school, how'd they do on SBAC? That's all manual, which is not impossible, but it's time. We're doing that work, but it's time consuming. So it's a great question.
But it is good news with the math testing. The minute the child finishes the test, you get the score, and then there's 4 different strands within that, and it shows you their lexile level or where they're at, and so that if you feel like they're not up to par, you at least have that information.
Which is why I do think that formative assessment will help shape instruction probably better than the claims information we're getting from the SBAC. So to now look, as Tom said, the sort of appendix, meaning the last vestiges of the Captain CMT, it's the science. Now, I stated before, the science assessment hasn't been retooled to the new standards, which is why if you look kind of statewide, Durg-wide, in our performance, it's not necessarily great. It's not necessarily great over time, but as we have moved to the NJSS standards, as other districts have moved, the state is saying that this year, 10th graders don't have to take the science assessment at all, because they're field testing the new NGSS standard assessment, which is much more aligned to our curriculum, and it will be implemented in grades 5, 8, and 11 in the 2018-19 school year. And I'm going to put more stock into that assessment, because that assessment actually is measuring our curriculum better than this. With that being said, you can kind of see where we're, no matter which grade span, above the state, and in, one case slightly better than the DERG, but I don't want to spend too much airtime on this because I do think it's an antiquated system that they have to retool. Marcia.
I just have a couple of comments. First of all, I think this is a very thorough report, and I really appreciate all the efforts that went into it. You definitely gave us plenty of data to look at. And I like the way you broke it down into the three areas. For instance, on page 12, with the performance and reading in the different strands, and then writing and research, and then the listening is very good with that. The same issues with math on page 14, you've got some issues, I think, although we improved somewhat, we have some real problems in all our grades with performance of concepts and procedures. Almost 25% of our kids from grade 3, it's 21%, 24%, 26%, 27%, 26%, and 37 in grade 8 that do not get concepts and procedures. That's a real issue. And then when we go over to page 15, we've got the same thing in grade 5, 6, and 8 again, 32%. That's a huge percent. And then performance in communicating reasoning. Reasoning, and I know in the lower grades they're concentrating on that, and lo and behold, they've got that, only 8% are below standard in the reasoning. And I think that's because of all the efforts that are going on in the elementary school. I would really like to see concerted efforts. I know we've got some things on paper that say that's what's going on at the middle school, but I don't know that curriculum is being followed. I don't know that anything besides multi-match is being done on Khan Academy. I'd like to see some way that we can get detailed information down to these teachers regarding the curriculum that is expected of them and how the curriculum fits with this testing. You mentioned curriculum just a minute ago, and that this is a measure of our curriculum. But if our teachers aren't teaching the curriculum, it isn't a measure of our curriculum. It's a measure of whatever they're using. I don't even know that we've approved MobiNet as part of our curriculum, and that really concerns me.
It is a district-approved software product. It is. So while I agree that obviously with 25% of our kids not where we want them to be in those areas, if you go back to the earlier slide around the cohort analysis, we know kids are learning. They're not where they need to be, but these numbers were higher last year, and they were higher the year before, and we know that because kids doing the cohort analysis from 4 to 6, 5 to 7, and 6 to 8, we know they're getting better in these things. So these numbers were worse before. So they're not where we need them to be, but we are, based on that cohort analysis data, trending in the right direction.
I guess I'd like to see just a little faster.
I understand.
and then when we go and ask for money and want extra teachers and coaches and everything else, there's got to be better, quicker results, I guess. I guess I'm impatient about it.
So, education, Marcia, as you said, is the key. I agree with that. In August, we had a presenter, a consultant come in, and we were able to kind of provide really grade-level detailed information for grades K to 6. This November, we have a different speaker coming in, again, to really unpack numeracy, getting kids to think, understand the problem, play around with ways to get there, and only then sort of teach the algorithm as a way of efficiency. For middle school, just to answer your question, I'm going to now jump ahead a few slides just to kind of show you kind of a middle school plan, which I do feel is addressing some of your urgent concerns. Okay, so middle school math, and be happy to, you'll see this actually in the overall November 7th professional development packet. However, we put some more resources in math intervention, as you recall, in the middle school, with a full-time interventionist as opposed to a non-certified tutor. We put more time as far as a full-time math coach, and Jim and Tracy, I don't want to say are singularly focused, but I'm going to say a large percent of their focus is really on math improvement. Right here is a detailed plan, agenda, for the half day for which the math department is going to be led by the math coach around how can we unpack those NCTM standards which really get to the problem solving and the communicating reasoning aspects, and how can we start introducing maybe some best practice resources and having the teachers pilot those resources to see, will that help students understand the material differently in a deeper level. So respectfully, I just wanted to kind of share as a preview some of the rigorous work that will go on during Election Day.
Right, and because you said you attributed a lot of the growth in the literacy to our literacy coaches and everything that's been going on there. And what I see a lot of times is when we have professional development, it doesn't always include grades 6, 7, and 8 in math. They're doing other things which are important, but maybe math ought to be a better priority, and I'm glad that is part of it.
It's also a philosophical and instructional decision. So we know by focusing on math, primarily last year and this year at the elementary grades, we know they're going to show up in 6th grade in a year or 2 or 3 years with a different skill set than the current kids who haven't had that background. We know we're teaching math differently because we get calls from parents all the time saying, this isn't the way I learned it. And so, there is logic to development of math at the K-5 level, knowing that they're going to show up in middle school now, next year, and the year after with a different skill set. So, absolutely agree with everything you're saying, and the board made a very conscious decision to put some resources in the middle school this year, and I think, I don't want to call it a phase-in approach, but if you look at it from a progressive standpoint, the development in the middle school along math started last year. We saw some great cohort growth data. Obviously the goal is for that to continue. So,
thank you. So the next phase of the report is really because SAT is the state summative assessment for high school. I've included that here. Tom alluded to the fact that Jason will really unpack this a little bit more. So the barometer for the SAT, you can see that we're above the state in ELA. We are slightly below the DERG with ELA, with overall achievement around 75%. And again, the achievement levels, because the SAT was a state summative test, the SAT had to have achievement levels of level 1 not met, level 2 approaching, level 3 met, level 4 exceeding. And so your old SAT scores of how much you got for ELA up to 800 is then separated out into those 4 bands. So 75% of our students are at the level 3 or level 4 performance band for SATs. If we look at math, we're above the state. We're not above the DERG. And as you can see, the bars of all 3 are more depressed than ELA. So showing that math is not singularly a Waterford issue, that's not an excuse, that's just a perspective statement. With 42.5% of our students in that performance band that we would expect, which is level 3 or level 4. This is the second year of that aligned SAT test, so we do have, I'm not going to call it trend data yet, but we do have, and it's not matched cohort data because it's different 11th graders, but we do have last year's 11th grade versus this year's 11th grade data, and then you can see the average score, knowing that the top of the mark is 1,600 when you add the average ELA score to the average math score. This year's or last year's SAT cohort improved from its predecessor in ELA by about 10 points and 3 points less in math. It's a hard comparison because it's different kids, so I'm not going to put a whole lot of more stock in that, but just data comparison. And you can kind of see that really the percent of kids in those bands are about the same from last year.
Is that including the essay portion also?
No, because the state summative test is only around kind of the other components.
The school day.
They have to take the SAT again with the essay component for some schools. So this is just what the state has negotiated with the college boards as to what they were going to fund.
And I think that's important. This is only the school day administration of the SAT. So all the kids who show up on Saturday and take it and all that has nothing to do with this data. This is just the
That is correct.
school day. And again, Jason's going to go into more depth.
They have to show up on the school day to take it, right?
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in the report, there are 3 pages of extensive next steps. I'll note that at the district level, establishing a district analysis and action team is on the forefront. Tom sent out an application to all staff members interested to become part of that district team already, and with an expected first meeting before Thanksgiving. So really to look at the data. And then every school, and I just broke it up by school level, elementary, middle, and high, in the report gave us how they were going to kind of drill down further and use the data to drive instruction. I just cherry-picked a couple from each level as a sample. If you have any detailed questions, I believe all principals are here to kind of drill down around that. If not, I just continue to kind of close this way that, one performance measure, we're it's a reflection of not only the dedication of our students, of our Waterford teachers and staff and administration, also really the parents, because the kids come ready to learn. And so, here to answer any questions you might have.
Can you talk to me about the DIRG versus the economic reference group? I saw very interesting. I know DIRGs are gone, but ERGs aren't, are they?
No, the ERGs are gone.
ERGs are gone.
So, economic reference groups were of the mid-90s, NIM, and every 10 years the state had contemplated recalibrating the reference groups.
Okay.
After the recalibration, the second recalibration of the ERG, the economic reference groups, some of the communities that were in ERG A were not pleased to maybe be in ERG B, and the State Department rebranded it as district reference groups. So that's kind of the short story of the name branding.
Wow.
You'll notice that... closet. For all intents and purposes. So you'll notice in page 28 of the report that the district reference groups were formed in 2006. More than 10 years have passed. The state no longer has any reference to DERGs. I've called the State Department to see, do they have any vision about doing a recalibration, especially because there's been other models from Council of Municipal Governments and other data sources that would model out that the current configurations are really not right anymore. So as an example, in a model, not approved by the state of Connecticut, but out there, East Line would move from DERG D to DERG B. We would maintain in DERG D. That's an example. So the notion of trying to compare with these 24 towns, now that more than 10 years has passed, is sort of losing validity. And as
It
such,
actually doesn't provide the data. You might remember from your days as a principal, you'd get a DERG report. The data
Not
doesn't.
anymore.
and so as such, certainly we look for best practices. I email my counterparts, what are you doing on this? They email me, Tom does the same. So that type of looking for best practice will never end, but the notion of kind of how do we measure in the DERG, I'm not sure is as valid as it was back in 2006.
So we're getting rid of it. Next year we'll just compare the state.
And more importantly, about our own growth. So are more kids hitting the growth target? Are more kids achieving at least a % of the growth target? And measuring against ourselves as continuous improvement is probably the best measure possible. So that's how we'll be doing it in the future.
I think that's great too. Measuring against ourselves is very important. But when we go to Board of Finances and RTM, they sometimes have another look at what your neighbors are doing.
Yep.
And the other thing is attracting people to Waterford, realty-wise. I think is people realtors look at yours and all that sort of stuff. And I'm wondering if we can't replace that with something. I mean, I noticed when we were doing negotiations, we have to do on county comparisons, and we have to do comparisons, and we're still using those. I suppose if enough communities get together, we could kind of have our own database or something to compare. Because I think community to community is something that historically has been done, and to just drop it is, I'm wondering how it's going to go over.
Well, that's not the state dropped it. It's
No,
not our
no,
decision,
no,
but from them,
and
from their point.
Yeah.
We can certainly look at a subsample of like towns. It would likely include districts from many different DERGs,
Right.
because the variation within the DERG. So I'll give you an example. Right now, we're in the same DERG as Old Saybrook. They have a significantly higher median income, and they only have 1,100 kids. We're also in with Wallingford, which has 8,000 students, with a much lower median income in metrics like single-parent households, parents with a master's degree, all of those metrics that go into it. So it would likely be a subsection that cross many DERGs. But we can.
Tom, when you go to your superintendent's meetings, I'm wondering if everybody's facing the same issues on this. You might want to see what their solution is.
And Greg actually attended a workshop that learned with other assistant superintendents who do this very similar presentation to say, what are you doing at your board meeting? What are you doing at your board
And
meeting?
you know that the day newspaper is going to print us some comparisons.
Sure.
East Line, Barton, Western.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Great.
Great job. Okay, now we are down.
I just have a few more items for superintendent's report. I know you've been here a while, since 5, but again, just to wrap up the report, want to commend Craig. Not only does he put a lot of time into this, he deals with my many tweaks, questions, so I appreciate all his work on putting that data together. More importantly, I appreciate his leadership working with the principals and staff in this area. Just a couple other quick hitters. I want to thank Clark Lane for the artwork in the board conference room in the hallway. Probably the brightest display we've had in a while, so we thank them. Just a reminder for the board and the public, our Parent Academy night is Tuesday, December 5th. Keynote speaker Tom Tinsons will speak on the challenges of helping your child manage social media. A very good topic, and then that's followed by breakouts that are presented by our administrators and teachers. We launched our second cohort of our Teacher Leadership Academy this week. We have 21 teachers from all 5 schools participating once again in targeted professional development around leadership. Many of our teachers take on leadership roles, whether by title or by action, and giving them some professional development in how to lead is something that we're committed to. Greg mentioned our November 7th PD Day. Plans are not only underway but nearly finalized. We will have multiple Veterans Day programs at our schools on Thursday, November 9th. I think Caroline's putting those in the Friday memo, so if you wish to attend those, just let us know so we can make sure we can recognize your attendance. Parent-teacher conferences, Friday, November 10th, so those slots are filling up quickly. I just want to mention a little piece of Waterford in the national news, and that's Special Olympics National was at Clark Lane last week, highlighting Clark Lane's unified sports program. That's going to be, we're told, in a nationally used video. When we get the final product, I'd love to show it to you all. It's really a spotlight program, and when we talk about character development in our youth, there's no better example than our unified programs at the middle school and high school. So, and just a reminder, next month's board meeting is Tuesday, November 14th, and that's to avoid not only the Thanksgiving holiday, but the CAPS conference as well. So, Tuesday, November 14th, 6 p.m. That concludes the superintendent's report.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, now we're down to committee and other reports. Does anybody have one?
I do. I can talk a little bit about the Finance Subcommittee, and board members can jump in as well. Finance Subcommittee met on October 4th. The primary goal of that meeting was to discuss a proposed MOU between the town and the Board of Ed on the community use of schools. The next step will be to bring back a proposed MOU to the Finance Subcommittee for consideration before sending it to the full board for action. And I'll cover a little bit more under community use of schools, but certainly if other board members had information to add on finance. I will be engaging the Finance Subcommittee. I think Caroline might have engaged them today via email to get a meeting together to look at the MOU, but also begin to set budget assumptions and priorities as we head into budget season.
Anybody from the Finance Committee want to say anything? Okay, good job. Okay, do you want to talk about the community use of schools now?
Sure, and Jody, you were there, as was Craig Merriman as well. That committee met on October 17th. Again, it discussed proposed language for the MOU, but considerable amount of time was spent around the finances of community use of schools. I think all of you have sat through a number of budget hearings over the years and understand how divisive this issue is. So what's being contemplated is a 4-year phase-out of the formula, get rid of the formula, and that would give the board 4 years to factor those costs into our base budget, so it's part of our operational costs, and B, find efficiencies where we can, and that's what's being contemplated at this current time. Jody and Craig were there. There were varied lengths of phase-out discussed. but a compromise seemed to be reached at 4 years. Happy to answer any questions. We do have another meeting on Monday of that group.
Quite a group. That's all I can say. Okay, Craig, do you want to say anything? No, not at all. Are there any other committee reports?
I went to the Martin Luther King Trust Fund dinner, which was good.
That's nice.
Some really great kids. I mean, they're very motivated kids that want to make a difference.
I've gone to several of them over the years, and I'm really impressed with the caliber of students. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And they had, what is it, 9?
That's $20,000 scholarship.
Yeah, it's a large number. Yeah.
And they're looking at maybe 10 next time, at least 10.
No, they do an excellent job. In your packet, I asked Tom and Caroline just to include the information so I won't take up a lot of your time. For Youth Service Bureau, what they have planned for the holidays, and I just wanted to make sure you read the Inside Out, the 5 free mental health workshops for younger children. Youth Service Bureau is really trying to work with the Board of Ed and to help, children, young children especially. And I love some of the topics. I mean, as adults, we forget, I think, sometimes we forget what children are going through. And hopefully these workshops will help. And also on November 9th, that's going to be a really busy day. They're going to be doing, Youth Service Bureau will be doing Stuff the Bus again. They're going to stop at each of the elementary schools, and the students are great. They donate cans of food for people at Thanksgiving. So I'm very proud of our students and our faculty. They really are trying to help our community. We have a home football game Friday night. We're playing Stonington. Our record isn't the greatest, but we have great kids on the team, so if you can go and support them, that would be great. Okay, I think that's it for committee and other reports. Now we're down to new business. The discussion of the budget calendar that was enclosed in our packet.
Basically a list of budget dates. We certainly are engaged in that process already. We plan to forward a superintendent's recommended budget to you in January, as it's been customary, with budget workshops throughout February, with final board action end of February. Those workshops are not only a time for the public to hear the budget, but it's also a time for you to make decisions and tweaks of the recommended budget. And then Board of Finance dates are on there as well, and RTM dates will be approved later this month, I'm told, at their next meeting. Tentatively scheduled first week of May.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments about the calendar?
We don't.
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think we ever have before.
Because they're all posted meetings. Correct.
I don't think we've ever voted on it before. Okay, now we're down to item D, first reading of policies. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Craig.
Sure, thank you, Jody. So we've got 8 policies tonight, 3 are really legislatively driven solely, so I'll go over the details. The first is policy 3544, the use of automatic external defibrillators. The policy was really changed from the CABE version to the Shipman and Goodwin version, and the regulations really delineate how we maintain and check for working systems, with our maintenance supervisor, Tommy Thurlow, really checking them on a monthly basis, giving the information to HR so that we know that we have working and operationalized defibrillators when we need them. You can kind of see the rest of the procedures that we do in the yellow regs, the forms that are checked off in the event that we have to use them, what the incident reports would look like, and in the event that we have to service them, how that's maintained as well. So the genesis for this one really was to put in the yellow regulations our operational procedures, and then we just brought it from the Cave to the Shipman and Goodwin version. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions or comments about this?
Because this one, the genesis was really ours, this would require a second reading.
Okay, you did look into it. I think I had asked you if, when our girls play at Lisa Deirdre Field, and then when our boys sometimes play at Leary, the athletic trainer goes with them, and then he has an AED.
Yeah.
I know those fields don't have one on hand.
I did email Dave Souza when that discussion happened, and I'm told we have a portable one, and we bring it to those away games, or those games that are off campus.
Great. Thank you.
Next one is policy 4111.2, and which would be certified, and 4211.2 non-certified. And this is where we had one policy talking about 504 and ADA, but really it was in our student section. And we know that adults, because ADA is for all students, and it's not just it's for all people. It's not just for students. ADA compliance. We really were missing the relevant sections in the personnel policy. So what we did was we looked for the Shipman and Goodwin model policy, and really it comports to what we have for students, and it separates out the nuances of what students would have different than adults, and just lays it out so that there's a clear policy. And if a staff member is experiencing a condition that they feel that they will require some reasonable accommodations, then those conversations are had, and when we can meet those reasonable accommodations, we do so.
Any questions or comments about this policy?
And again, because we kind of taught this as really a best practice, this would require a second reading.
Okay.
The next is really a legislatively driven policy change, and so the Public Act 1641, which really talks about the recruitment of minority teachers, includes requirements for state universities to develop programs for 11th and 12th grade students. There's been a citation included, and we basically took the policy that was in a CABE version to Shipman and Goodwin. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but because the genesis of this was more legislatively driven, you could entertain a motion tonight to approve this policy.
Okay. Ann, did you want to make a...
That the Washington Board of Education approves and adopts policy 4111.3, plan for minority staff recruitment as presented.
Is there a second? Marsha? Okay, any discussion or questions? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. The next policy is appointment and conditions of employment. Policy 4112 or 4212, depending certified or non-certified. This really has been developed as a best practice by Shipman and Goodwin, so this would require a second reading. There's language in here around nepotism and who can we hire, and so I would ask you to take a close read of that, and if you have any questions now or even before the next meeting, I would just ask you to let me know if there's anything that we need to research around this.
Okay, any questions or comments about this policy? Anybody? All right.
Okay. So, next one is employment checks, policy 4112.5. This was a legislative significant revisions in Public Act 1667. around what we have to do around employment checks. This actually is a policy that as a policy, as a board, we're catching up to state law. We've implemented this a year ago, July, when the law came into effect, with some significant changes around where we keep fingerprinted material, in what locked place, who has access to it, how many years we have to call back for references when potential employee candidates have worked with children. And so this is, again, majorly legislatively driven. I think the genesis was an FBI kind of review in the state of Connecticut that kind of drove this legislative change. We have followed it. Principals are adhering to the rigorous background checks that we have to do for all staff. Be happy to answer any questions. Because of the legislative aspect, we could entertain a motion tonight to approve this.
Somebody like to make a motion, and then we can discuss it after.
Let the Board of Education approve and adopt policy 4112.5 and 4212.5 employment tests as presented.
The second? Marcia? Okay, any discussion or questions? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously.
It is, the old days, you might call one or two employers, and it might have been their friends. Now it's really, right. And
So this is all policy, not even a regulation.
That is correct, because it's of that level of importance that the board would have to take action to modify any policy where if there was ever a regulation change, we'd kind of notice the board if we were doing a different procedure. But the law was written so much so that the bar is very high to change anything in this. Next policy is around sex discrimination or sexual harassment, policy 4118.112. Legal references and contact information for the EEOC has been updated, revised to the complaint form that incorporates employer notice is embedded in our regulations, and we've also taken this policy from the CABE version to a Shipman and Goodwin version, hence the extensive changes, but really it was more of a legal reference requirement change that's the genesis of this, so we could,
no, this is the second reading.
Sorry, we do need a second reading on this one. So, happy to answer any questions. Sorry about that.
Any questions? Okay. About the policy? Okay.
This one is where, in reference to same-sex marriages, has been moved in light of recent Supreme Court cases. In addition, a legal reference to Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008 has been revised. So this one is really just changes for those legalese. So that could enjoy a motion tonight.
Board's pleasure. Do you want to make a motion to accept this? We're really putting you to work.
What if the Board of Education approves and adopts policy 4152.6 and 4252.6, Family Medical Leave Act as presented?
Is there a second? Okay. Very good team tonight. Okay, any more discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. And lastly, in our policy juggernaut of the evening is residency verification. The genesis of this policy really was around we want to have an online registration system, and we want to make sure that our registration form kind of passes muster if we're going to bring it to an online version. So Shipman and Goodwin, we've moved from the CABE to the Shipman and Goodwin model, and the regulations, you can kind of see that we had to bifurcate our existing registration policy so that it didn't look like we were asking some questions in order to gain access to be registered. So this, we're asking just the essential questions to become registered, and you can kind of see the changes in the regulations and the forms. And then once the child is registered, then we ask for supplemental information, which we need for our PSIS system. But that's the kind of the legal nuance. So that one, we would require a second reading, and we are ready to go live with that online registration as soon as that occurs. Happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions for Craig about this policy? Okay. Is there anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Martha? Okay. Any discussion? Thank you, everybody, for coming. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you, Ann.
A lot of policies.
Yes, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So excited.
Oh,